Captain Jack Thorne could accurately be described as many things: decorated war hero, expert tactician, and the absolute worst choice to represent humanity in a delicate diplomatic mission. Yet here he was, slouching in the most sacred chamber of the Zulaxian Empire, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Captain Thorne, may I remind you that this meeting represents the culmination of 17 years of careful diplomacy," whispered Lieutenant Marcus Reed, the sweat beading on his forehead as he observed the Zulaxian entourage entering the grand hall. "Relax, Reed. Aliens are just people with extra bits," Jack replied, stretching his arms overhead. "Been doing this dance since the Arcturus campaign." Reed's complexion shifted from anxious pink to horrified white. "Sir, the Arcturans communicate through interpretive dance. The Zulaxians have 27 levels of formal address and consider physical comfort in the presence of authority to be the highest form of disrespect." Details. The Zulaxian imperial procession was a sight to behold. 12 guards with iridescent scales moved in perfect synchronization, each step precisely 30 centimeters apart. Behind them floated Emperor Kai the Magnificent atop a levitating platform adorned with the jewels of 1,000 conquered worlds. A Zulaxian announcer with a voice like gravel in a blender proclaimed, "His Supreme Celestial Majesty, Emperor Kai the Magnificent, Destroyer of Worlds, the Unifier of the Seven Systems, Keeper of the Sacred Flames of Zulax Prime, approaches. All beings shall prostrate themselves before his magnificence." Everyone in the room immediately dropped to the floor. Everyone except Jack Thorne. Reed hissed from his prostrate position, "For the love of Earth, get down." Jack yawned. The journey had been long, and these diplomatic chairs were criminally uncomfortable. His eyes wandered to the ornate table between him and the Emperor's floating throne, gleaming obsidian with intricate carvings depicting Zulaxian military victories. It looked sturdy enough. With casual disregard that would haunt human-Zulaxian relations for generations, Captain Jack Thorne kicked back, swung his muddy combat boots up, and rested them directly on the Emperor's ceremonial table. The room froze. A Zulaxian minister dropped dead from shock. Emperor Kai's 4 eyes widened to perfect circles. His ceremonial headpiece quivered. The Imperial Guard reached for weapons that could vaporize continents. Reed closed his eyes and mentally composed a letter to Jack's next of kin. "So," said Jack, meeting the Emperor's gaze directly, "another catastrophic breach of protocol. Let's cut the ceremony and talk business, shall we?" The translator droid short-circuited rather than relay such impudence. And just like that, 17 years of careful diplomatic groundwork evaporated faster than water on a neutron star. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez was enjoying her first cup of coffee in the diplomatic quarters when the emergency transmission arrived. The message was just 3 words from Lieutenant Reed. He did it. Elena spat her coffee across 3 star charts and a peace treaty draft. She didn't need clarification on who he was. Captain Jack Thorne had been a ticking diplomatic time bomb since the moment Fleet Admiral Jenkins had assigned him to her team. He was a war hero, Jenkins had said. The public loves him. Having him on your diplomatic team will play well back home. What Jenkins had failed to mention was that Jack's heroism typically involved blowing things up rather than talking things through. 20 minutes later, Elena burst into the Imperial chamber to find Jack still lounging with his boots on the table, Reed looking catatonic, and a Zulaxian protocol minister named Krill, documenting the offenses in a scroll that now dragged along the floor. And the 74th violation, maintaining eye contact for 3.7 seconds longer than permitted with a third-rank Imperial advisor, Krill Thak was saying, his purple-faced tentacles vibrating with indignation. Ambassador Rodriguez, the Emperor acknowledged, his universal translator making his voice sound like James Earl Jones with a head cold. "Perhaps you can explain why this human seems determined to start an interstellar incident." Elena bowed so deeply she nearly headbutted the floor. "Your magnificent celestialness, I offer 10,000 apologies for Captain Thorne's behavior. He suffers from a rare human condition called chronic irreverence syndrome. Very tragic." Jack snorted. "I'm sitting right here, you know." "Unfortunately, yes," Elena muttered before returning to her diplomatic smile. "Emperor Kraz Kai, humanity deeply values this potential alliance. Perhaps we could." The human placed his foot coverings on the table of ancestral glory. Kriltak interjected, a vein pulsing visibly through his translucent skull. The sacred table carved from the remains of the first Zulaxian space vessel. There are 342 prescribed punishments, starting with ritual disembowelment. Jack looked down at the table. Oh, it's a nice table. Good craftsmanship. Elena considered whether she could claim diplomatic immunity for throttling her own delegation member. The tension was interrupted when Emperor Kraz Kai did something completely unexpected. He laughed. Not a polite diplomatic chuckle, but a full-bodied, tentacle-shaking guffaw that sent his imperial advisors into confused panic. 5,000 cycles of the same tedious protocols, the Emperor said, wiping a gelatinous tear from his third eye. And then this human walks in, puts his dirty boots on my ancestors' sacred table, and simply asks to talk business. Fascinating. Kriltak looked like he might spontaneously combust. But your magnificence, the sacred texts clearly state. The sacred texts were written before we met beings who cross galaxies wearing what they call cargo pants. Kriltak, the Emperor interrupted. Perhaps some flexibility is warranted. The news of this diplomatic anomaly spread quickly. Within hours, the Galactic Council had convened an emergency session. Representatives from 17 species demanded explanations. The Arachnoid Confederation threatened to withdraw from treaty negotiations entirely, citing human unpredictability as a destabilizing galactic influence. Elena spent 6 straight hours in subspace communications, alternating between profuse apologies and thinly veiled threats of economic sanctions. Meanwhile, Jack had somehow convinced the Emperor to try something called a high five, and was teaching Imperial guards how to play poker using ceremonial meditation stones as chips. "You know," Jack said as Elena finished her 20th apology call, "I think this is going pretty well." Elena's eye twitched. "Define well, Captain." "The Emperor likes me. That's diplomacy, right?" Diplomacy is methodical, careful relationship building between civilizations with vastly different values and customs, Elena explained with forced patience. "Not whatever this chaos is." Jack shrugged. "Sounds boring." As night fell on the Zulaxian capital, Elena received an unexpected message. Emperor Kraz Kai had invited Captain Thorne to join him for the sacred meal and honor typically reserved for beings who had completed 40 years of protocol training. "Don't you dare put your eating utensils anywhere inappropriate," Elena warned Jack as he prepared to leave. Jack grinned. "Would I do that?" "Yes," shouted everyone in the Earth delegation simultaneously. 2 weeks before the diplomatic mission, the entire Earth delegation had attended an extensive briefing on Zulaxian customs. The session had been conducted by Professor Lydia Montgomery, the galaxy's foremost expert on Zulaxian culture, but who had spent 30 years studying their intricate social hierarchies. The most important thing to remember, Professor Montgomery had emphasized, pointing to a holographic display of Zulaxian ceremonial postures, is that every gesture has meaning. The angle of your head tentacles, or in your case, neck, communicates your status relative to your conversation partner. Jack Thorne had been absent, claiming a critical mission simulation that later turned out to be a virtual reality golf tournament in the recreation deck. Captain Thorne will be briefed separately, Ambassador Rodriguez had assured the professor. That separate briefing consisted of Elena cornering Jack in the mess hall the night before landing and desperately trying to convey 17 hours of cultural protocols in 5 minutes. "Look, just don't make direct eye contact. Don't show the bottom of your feet. Don't eat before the Emperor takes his 7th bite." And for heaven's sake, don't touch anything purple, it's either sacred or poisonous, and they don't tell outsiders which is which. Jack had nodded along while constructing what appeared to be the tallest sandwich in human history. No eye contact, no feet, wait for bites, avoid purple. Got it. Issa. It was abundantly clear now that he had got nothing. The contrast between human and Zulaxian diplomatic approaches couldn't have been more stark. Where humans aimed for direct communication with a healthy dose of strategic ambiguity, Zulaxians had elevated ambiguity to an art form. A slight tilt of the head could mean anything from "I deeply value your contribution to this discussion" to "I am contemplating the annihilation of your homeworld." Jack's direct approach was the equivalent of bringing a sledgehammer to a needlepoint competition. "The human has no understanding of the way," remarked Commander Vex, the Emperor's military advisor and a being who had made no secret of his disdain for Earth's recent galactic prominence. Vex belonged to the Trilaxian species, distant evolutionary cousins to the Zulaxians, with one crucial difference. Where Zulaxians had developed elaborate social rituals, Trilaxians had perfected the art of warfare. Standing 2 meters tall with exoskeletal armor naturally embedded in his blue-gray skin, Vex cut an imposing figure. "These humans achieved faster than light travel barely a century ago," Vex continued, addressing a group of influential ministers. "They're galactic infants, stumbling around, breaking diplomatic furniture. The Emperor's indulgence of this Captain Thorne is concerning." The boot incident, as it was now being called throughout the 17 connected galaxies, had become the most discussed diplomatic event since the Proxima Centauri representative had accidentally married 14 Betelgeusian nobility by incorrectly pronouncing the word for appetizer. On the Galactic Infinite, memes spread showing photoshopped images of boots on various sacred objects across different cultures. A fashion designer on Alpha Centauri launched a diplomatic disaster footwear line. The Jovian colonies held protest rallies, while Martian settlements celebrated with boot parties. Elena monitored all of this with increasing horror from her diplomatic quarters. "We've become a galactic joke," she groaned, scrolling through headlines. "Boots of mass destruction, human diplomat tramples traditions, and these boots were made for talking. New human diplomacy shocks elder races." Lieutenant Reed attempted consolation. "At least they're talking about us. They're selling souvenir boots with Jack's face on them in the Andromeda Galaxy, Marcus. This is not the diplomatic legacy I had in mind." Meanwhile, Jack was blissfully unaware of his galactic notoriety, having been invited to join the Emperor on a ceremonial hunt. Despite Elena's strenuous objections, Jack had gone equipped with only his standard-issue blaster and a flask of whiskey that definitely violated about 16 different interplanetary contraband regulations. How much worse could it get? Reed wondered aloud. Elena gave him a look that could have withered a neutron star. "Never ask that question in diplomatic service, Lieutenant. The universe is always listening." What nobody in the Earth delegation expected was that Emperor Kraz Kai would return from the ceremonial hunt carrying Jack Thorne on his imperial shoulders. Both of them covered in some kind of iridescent purple slime and laughing like old fraternity brothers. "Ambassador." The Emperor called out, his translator struggling to convey his enthusiasm. "Your Captain Thorne has slain a Grathmar beast with nothing but his primitive projectile weapon and what he calls trash talk. No Zulaxian has accomplished this in 7 generations. Jack, looking far too pleased with himself, added, "Turns out threatening its mother's reproducing capabilities works across species." Elena's diplomatic smile was frozen in place. "How resourceful of you, Captain." What followed was even more surprising. Young Zulaxians began appearing at the diplomatic compound, requesting audiences with the boot human. Apparently, Jack's disregard for thousand-year-old protocols had struck a chord with a generation of Zulaxians increasingly frustrated with their rigid society. "They think you're some kind of revolutionary," Elena explained to Jack as they watched a group of young Zulaxians outside their quarters attempting to imitate human casual postures. They've started a movement called Free Feet that's driving the traditional elders to distraction. Jack shrugged. Kids always rebel against their parents. Some things are universal. This isn't some teenage rebellion, Jack. This is potentially reshaping the culture of one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. Because I put my boots on a table? Sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences, Elena said, unwillingly impressed by the unexpected cultural shift. The question is, how do we leverage this to Earth's advantage without causing a civil war? The opportunity came sooner than expected. Emperor Kraskai invited the Earth delegation to observe the ancient ceremony of planetary alignment, during which major policy decisions were traditionally announced. More importantly, it was when new allies were formally recognized or rejected. I wonder if we should get you some clean boots, Elena pondered, eyeing Jack's scuffed footwear. These are my lucky boots, Jack protested. I've worn them in 3 different wars and 7 first contact scenarios. That explains so much, Elena muttered. Meanwhile, Commander Vex was not taking the humans' unexpected popularity well. During an emergency meeting with the Council of Elders, his facial tentacles thrashed with agitation. This human makes mockery of everything we hold sacred. And you embrace him? Has the entire Imperial Court lost its senses? Vex demanded. Elder Zorn, the oldest living Zulaxian, raised a gnarled appendage. Change has always been part of the Zulaxian way, even if we pretend otherwise. Perhaps it is time we examined which traditions serve us and which merely preserve the past for its own sake. Vex's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. I see the human corruption has spread further than I feared. Very well. If reason will not prevail, other measures must be taken. Back at the Earth compound, Jack and Elena were attempting to prepare for the ceremony, with Elena drilling Jack on the 37 ritual responses he would need to recite. Why can't I just say sounds good to everything? Jack complained after mispronouncing a Zulaxian phrase that accidentally translated to your reproductive organs smell of fermented vegetation. Because sounds good could translate to anything from I agree completely to I challenge your firstborn to ritual combat, Elena explained with thinning patience. Just memorize the phrases. You know, Jack said, surprisingly thoughtful, for a species that's been around for 50,000 years, you'd think they'd have developed a more efficient communication system. Elena paused. That's actually not a bad observation. Ceremony often calcifies around power structures. The complexity ensures outsiders can't easily join the inner circles. So we're dealing with an interstellar country club? A heavily armed one with planet-destroying capabilities, yes. Jack grinned. Well, I've been getting kicked out of exclusive clubs my whole life. This one's just bigger. As night fell on the Zulaxian capital, neither of them noticed the small drone outside their window, recording every word and transmitting directly to Commander Vex's private quarters. The Great Hall of Celestial Harmony was packed with representatives from across the Zulaxian Empire. The ceremonial alignment of the 7 moons of Zulax Prime occurred once every 63 years, making this diplomatic event quite literally a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for most beings present. Ambassador Rodriguez had managed, through a combination of threats, bribery, and one very intense staring contest, to get Jack into formal diplomatic attire. The victory was somewhat undermined by his refusal to wear anything but his infamous boots, now polished to a slightly less offensive shine. Remember, Elena whispered as they took their positions, this ceremony lasts 9 hours. There will be 17 ritual pauses where no one speaks. Do not, under any circumstances, fill these silences. 9 hours? Jack hissed back. What happens if someone needs to use the bathroom? There are ceremonial catheter units under each cushion. You're kidding. I wish I were. The last dignitary who left mid-ceremony started the 3-century war with the Proxima colonies. The ceremony began with the traditional recitation of ancestral achievements, a comprehensive listing of every significant Zulaxian accomplishment since they developed written language. 3 hours in, they had reached the invention of space travel. Jack was dying. Not literally, though he was beginning to think death might be preferable to hearing about one more glorious innovation in waste recycling technology during the Third Dynastic period. His legs had gone numb an hour ago. The ceremonial robes itched in places he didn't know could itch. Worst of all, he'd made the rookie mistake of drinking the welcome beverage, which turned out to have mild hallucinogenic properties for humans. Was that ceremonial statue winking at him? The Emperor was now reciting the 7,000 titles associated with his lineage. They had reached number 4,812, destroyer of the rebellious moon miners of Zulax Beta. Then it happened. Commander Vex approached the Emperor and whispered something in his ear. The Emperor's face, all 4 eye stalks and central sensory cluster darkened to a dangerous purple. "Halt the ceremony," the Emperor commanded, his voice echoing through the hall. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. In 50,000 years of Zulaxian history, the celestial alignment ceremony had never been interrupted. "It has come to our imperial attention," the Emperor announced, "that the humans may not be approaching these negotiations in good faith." Elena shot Jack a panicked look. Jack shrugged, equally confused. The Emperor continued, "Evidence has been presented that suggests the humans view our sacred traditions as," and I quote, "an interstellar country club designed to exclude others from power." Jack winced. His exact words from last night. Furthermore, the Emperor's voice grew colder, "But they have been strategizing ways to leverage cultural shifts to Earth's advantage and consider our ceremonial communication inefficient." Every eye in the hall turned toward the human delegation. Elena's diplomatic training had prepared her for many crisis scenarios, but being caught trash talking an ancient civilization's entire cultural foundation wasn't in the manual. Before Elena could formulate a response, Jack stood up. Elena grabbed his arm, hissing, "Sit down. Only the imperial family stands during the ceremony." Jack ignored her, meeting the Emperor's gaze directly. Another breach of protocol. At this point, Elena wondered if they'd ever make it off the planet alive. "Yeah, I said those things," Jack admitted, his voice carrying through the hall. "And I meant them." Krilthak, the protocol minister, fainted dead away. Several elder Zulaxians clutched their ceremonial pearls. But Jack continued, "I also said they're one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy, which is pretty impressive. Where I come from, we think buildings from a few hundred years ago are ancient. You guys have been doing this dance for 50,000 years. That's worth respecting." The Emperor's expression was unreadable. Commander Vex looked triumphant. Jack took a step forward. "The way I see it, you've got 2 options. You can kick us out for not playing by rules we barely understand, or you can realize that different perspectives might actually be valuable. Earth is young and makes mistakes, but we adapt fast. We learn. We innovate. And yeah, sometimes we put our boots where they don't belong." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, to everyone's horror, Jack did the unthinkable. He turned and deliberately, even gracefully, placed his right boot directly on the Emperor's ceremonial throne. The Imperial guards raised their weapons. Elena closed her eyes, certain she was about to witness the beginning of an interstellar war. "This human," Commander Vex declared, "has just committed the highest form of treason. The penalty is immediate execution." The Zulaxian fleet, monitoring the ceremony from orbit, moved into attack positions. On Earth, defense systems detected the shift and went to high alert. Across 17 systems, species held their breath, watching the live feed of what appeared to be the beginning of the first galactic war in 10,000 years. all because of one pair of boots. For 30 excruciating seconds, the fate of interstellar peace hung in the balance. Jack Thorne, boots still resting on the Emperor's throne, showed no sign of backing down. The Imperial Guard's weapons hummed with enough energy to vaporize him where he stood. Then Emperor Kai did something that would rewrite diplomatic textbooks across the galaxy. He laughed. Not a nervous chuckle or diplomatic courtesy laugh. A deep, genuine belly laugh that set all 4 of his eye stalks quivering. In 50,000 years of Zulaxian history, the Emperor declared, no being has ever dared to challenge me so directly. It is refreshing. Commander Vex's jaw dropped, literally detaching as Tralaxian jaws do in moments of extreme shock. But your magnificence, the human has violated the 73rd sacred. Oh, be quiet, Vex, the Emperor interrupted, shocking the assembly further. For centuries, you've been trying to convince me that humans are too unpredictable, too dangerous to ally with. And yes, they are unpredictable. That is precisely why we need them. The Emperor rose from his throne and gestured to Jack. This human breaks every rule and still achieves his objective. While we spend decades perfecting ceremonial greetings, younger races are innovating, exploring, and yes, occasionally putting their boots where they don't belong. Jack removed his boot from the throne with a slight bow that somehow managed to be both respectful and subtly irreverent. Your magnificent celestialness, Jack said, humanity doesn't always get it right. We're messy, we break things, and sometimes we don't know when to shut up. But we're also really good at fixing problems, especially ones we create. The Emperor approached Jack. The hall held its collective breath. Then, in a move that sent shockwaves through the Empire, Emperor Kai removed his ceremonial headpiece, a gesture traditionally reserved for moments of profound transition, and placed it on the floor. Then, to the astonishment of all present, he placed his scaled foot upon it. Perhaps, the Emperor said, some traditions deserve to be broken. Ambassador Rodriguez, sensing a historic diplomatic opening, stepped forward. Emperor Kai, humanity would be honored to formalize an alliance between our civilizations, one based on mutual respect for our differences, rather than forced conformity to either of our ways. The Emperor nodded. I propose a new treaty, one that acknowledges the value of both stability and innovation, tradition and progress. And so, the Boots Treaty was signed not on ceremonial scrolls, but on the well-worn leather of Jack Thorne's right boot, a diplomatic first that would become legendary throughout the galaxy. News of the treaty spread faster than light itself, thanks to the newly approved Zulaxian quantum communication arrays now shared with Earth. Across the 17 systems, reactions ranged from horror to amusement to grudging respect. 6 standard months later, Jack Thorne found himself back on Earth, receiving the newly created Interstellar Diplomatic Achievement Medal from the Secretary-General of United Earth. I still don't understand how putting your feet on furniture constitutes diplomacy, Elena remarked at the reception afterward. Jack shrugged, sipping champagne. Sometimes diplomacy isn't about saying the right thing, it's about being the right person at the right moment. The Zulaxians needed someone to challenge them, not bow to them. Philosophical insights from the man who nearly started a galactic war. Who would have thought? Elena raised her glass to unconventional diplomacy. To boots on tables, Jack countered with a grin. The boot incident went down in diplomatic history as the turning point in human Zulaxian relations. Jack's infamous footwear was eventually enshrined in the Galactic Museum of Significant Historical Objects, displayed alongside the Emperor's ceremonial headpiece. Diplomatic academies across Earth added a new course to their curriculum, Adaptive Protocol, when breaking rules makes new ones. Captain Jack Thorne, despite protests from traditional diplomats, became a regular guest lecturer. As for the Zulaxian Empire, They introduced a ceremonial boot placement into their formal diplomatic receptions, a symbolic acknowledgement that sometimes the greatest respect comes not from blindly following tradition, but from having the courage to challenge it. And Commander Vex? He retired to the outer colonies, where he still complains to anyone who will listen about that insufferable human with the boots who ruined everything. Some traditions, it seems, die harder than others.